The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. Lecture 5. The Spirit of the Muslim Culture. Muhammad of Arabia ascended the highest heaven and returned. I swear by God that if I had reached that point, I should never have returned. These are the words of a great Muslim saint, Al-Quddus of Gangoh. In the whole range of Sufi literature, it will probably be difficult to find the words which, in a single sentence, disclose such an acute perception of the psychological difference between the prophetic and the mystic types of consciousness. The mystic does not wish to return from the repose of unitary experience, and even when he does, as he must, his return does not mean much for mankind at large. The prophet's return is creative. He returns to insert himself into the sweep of time with a view to control the forces of history and thereby to create a fresh world of ideals. For the mystic, the repose of unitary experience is something final. For the prophet, it is the awakening within him of world-shaking psychological forces calculated to completely transform the human world. The desire to see his religious experience transformed into a living world force is supreme in the prophet. Thus, his return amounts to a kind of pragmatic test of the value of his religious experience. In its creative act, the prophet's will judges both itself and the world of concrete fact in which it endeavors to objectify itself. In penetrating the impervious material before him, the prophet discovers himself for himself and unveils himself to the eye of history. Another way of judging the value of a prophet's religious experience, therefore, would be to examine the type of manhood that he has created and the cultural world that has sprung out of the spirit of his message. In this lecture, I want to confine myself to the latter alone. The idea is not to give you a description of the achievements of Islam in the domain of knowledge. I want rather to fix your gaze on some of the ruling concepts of the culture of Islam in order to gain an insight into the process of ideation that underlies them, and thus to catch a glimpse of the soul that found expression through them. Before, however, I proceed to do so, it is necessary to understand the cultural value of a great idea in Islam. I mean, the finality of the institution of prophethood. A prophet may be defined as a type of mystic consciousness in which unitary experience tends to overflow its boundaries and seeks opportunities of redirecting or refashioning the forces of collective life. In his personality, the finite center of life sinks into his own infinite depths, only to spring up again with fresh vigor to destroy the old and to disclose the new directions of life. This contact with the root of his own being is by no means peculiar to man. Indeed, the way in which the word inspiration, used in the Quran shows that the Quran regards it as a universal property of life, though its nature and character are different at different stages of the evolution of life. The plant growing freely in space, the animal developing a new organ to suit a new environment, and a human being receiving light from the inner depths of life are all cases of inspiration varying in character according to the needs of the recipient or the needs of the species to which the recipient belongs. Now, during the minority of mankind, psychic energy develops what I call prophetic consciousness, a mode of economizing individual thought and choice by providing ready-made judgments, choices and ways of action. With the birth of reason and critical faculty, however, life, in its own interest, inhibits the formation and growth of non-rational modes of consciousness through which psychic energy flowed at an earlier stage of human evolution. Man is primarily governed by passion and instinct. Inductive reason, which alone makes man master of his environment, is an achievement, and when once born, it must be reinforced by inhibiting the growth of other modes of knowledge. There is no doubt that the ancient world produced some great systems of philosophy at a time when man was comparatively primitive and governed more or less by suggestion. But we must not forget that this system building in the ancient world was the work of the abstract thought which cannot go beyond the systemization of vague religious beliefs and traditions and gives us no hold on the concrete situations of life. Looking at the matter from this point of view, then the Prophet of Islam seems to stand between the ancient and modern world. Insofar as the source of his revelation is concerned, he belongs to the ancient world. Insofar as the spirit of his revelation is concerned, he belongs to the modern world. In him, life discovers other sources of knowledge suitable to its new direction. The birth of Islam, as I hope to be able presently to prove to your satisfaction, is the birth of inductive intellect. In Islam, prophecy reaches its perfection in discovering the need of its own abolition. This involves the keen perception that life cannot forever be kept in leading strings, that in order to achieve full self-consciousness, man must finally be thrown back on his own resources. The abolition of priesthood and hereditary kingship in Islam, the constant appeal to reason and experience in the Quran, and the emphasis that it lays on nature and history as sources of human knowledge are all different aspects of the same idea of finality. The idea, however, does not mean that mystic experience, which qualitatively does not differ from the experience of the Prophet, has now ceased to exist as a vital fact. Indeed, the Quran regards both anfus, self, and dunya, the world, as sources of knowledge. God reveals his signs in inner as well as outer experience, and it is the duty of man to judge the knowledge yielding capacity of all aspects of experience. The idea of finality, therefore, should not be taken to suggest that the ultimate fate of life is complete displacement of emotion by reason. Such a thing is neither possible nor desirable. The intellectual value of the idea is that it tends to create an independent critical attitude towards mystic experience by generating the belief that all personal authority, claiming a supernatural origin, has come to an end in the history of man. This kind of belief is a psychological force which inhibits the growth of such authority. The function of the idea is to open up fresh vistas of knowledge in the domain of man's inner experience. Just as the first half of the formula of Islam has created and fostered the spirit of a critical observation of man's outer experience by divesting the forces of nature of that divine character with which earlier cultures had clothed them. Mystic experience, then, however unusual and abnormal, must now be regarded by a Muslim as a perfectly natural experience, open to critical scrutiny like other aspects of human experience. This is clear from the Prophet's own attitude towards Ibn Ayyad's psychic experiences. The function of Sufism in Islam has been to systematize mystic experience, though it must be admitted that Ibn Khaldun was the only Muslim who approached it in a thoroughly scientific spirit. But inner experience is only one source of human knowledge. According to the Quran, there are two other sources of knowledge, nature and history. And what it is in tapping these sources of knowledge that the spirit of Islam is seen at its best. The Quran sees signs of the ultimate reality in the sun, the moon, the lengthening out of the shadows, the alternation of day and night, the variety of human colors and tongues, the alternation of the days of success and reverse among peoples. In fact, in the whole of nature as revealed to the sense perception of man. And the Muslim's duty is to reflect on these signs and not to pass by them, as if he is dead and blind. For he who does not see these signs in this life will remain blind to the realities of the life to come. This appealed to the concrete combined with the slow realization that, according to the teachings of the Quran, the universe is dynamic in its origin, finite and capable of increase, eventually brought Muslim thinkers into conflict with Greek thought, which, in the beginning of their intellectual career, they had studied with so much enthusiasm, not realizing that the spirit of the Quran was essentially anti-classical and putting full confidence in Greek thinkers. Their first impulse was to understand the Quran in the light of Greek philosophy. In view of the concrete spirit of the Quran and the speculative nature of Greek philosophy, which enjoyed theory and was neglectful of fact, this attempt was foredoomed to failure. And it is what follows their failure that brings out the real spirit of the culture of Islam and lays the foundation of modern culture in some of its most important aspects. This intellectual revolt against Greek philosophy manifests itself in all departments of thought. I am afraid I am not competent enough to deal with it as it discloses itself in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. It is clearly visible in the metaphysical thought of the Asharite, but appears as a most well-defined phenomenon in the Muslim criticism of Greek logic. This was only natural, for dissatisfaction with purely speculative philosophy means the search for a surer method of knowledge. It was, I think, Qayyim who first formulated the principle of doubt as the beginning of all knowledge. Ghazali further amplified it in his revivification of the sciences of religion and prepared the way for Descartes' method. But Ghazali remained on the whole a follower of Aristotle in logic. In his Qistas, he put some of the Quranic arguments in the form of Aristotelian figures, but forgets that the Quranic Sirah, known as Shura, where the proposition that retribution follows the gainsaying of prophets is established by the method of simple enumeration of historical instances. It was Ishraqi and Ibn Taymiyyah who undertook a systematic refutation of Greek logic. Abu Bakr Razi was perhaps the first to criticize Aristotle's first figure, and in our own times his objection, conceived in a thoroughly inductive spirit, has been reformulated by John Stuart Mill. Ibn Azam, in his Scope of Logic, emphasizes sense perception as a source of knowledge, and Ibn Taymiyyah, in his Refutation of Logic, shows that induction is the only form of reliable argument. Thus arose the method of observation and experiment. It was not a merely theoretical affair. Al-Bayruni's discovery of what we call reaction time and Al-Kindi's discovery that sensation is proportionate to the stimulus are instances of its application in psychology. It is a mistake to suppose that the experimental method is a European discovery. Turing tells us that Roger Bacon's conceptions of science are more just and clear than those of his celebrated namesake. And where did Roger Bacon receive his scientific training? In the Muslim universities of Spain. Indeed, 5 of his opus majus, which is devoted to perceptive, is practically a copy of Ibn Haytham's Optics. Nor is the book as a whole lacking in evidences of Ibn Hazm's influence on its author. Europe has been rather slow to recognize the Islamic origin of her scientific method, but full recognition of the fact has at last come. Let me quote one of the two passages from Preface's Making of Humanity. It was under their successors at the Oxford School that Roger Bacon learned Arabic and Arabic science. Neither Roger Bacon nor his later namesake has any title to be credited with having introduced the experimental method. Roger Bacon was no more than one of the apostles of Muslim science and method to Christian Europe, and he never wearied of declaring that a knowledge of Arabic and Arabian science was for his contemporaries the only way to true knowledge. Discussions as to who was the originator of the experimental method are part of the colossal misrepresentation of the origins of European civilization. The experimental method of the Arabs was, by Bacon's time, widespread and eagerly cultivated throughout Europe. Science is the most momentous contribution of the Arab civilization to the modern world, but its fruits were slow in ripening. Not until long after Moorish culture had sunk back into darkness did the giant to which it had given birth rise in his might. It was not science which brought Europe back to life. Other and manifold influences from the civilization of Islam communicated its first glow to European life. For although there is not a single aspect of European growth in which the decisive influence of Islamic culture is not traceable, nowhere is it so clear and momentous as in the genesis of that power which constitutes the paramount distinctive force of the modern world and the supreme source of its victory: natural science and the scientific spirit. The debt of our science to that of the Arabs does not consist in startling discoveries or revolutionary theories. Science owes a great deal more to Arab culture. It owes its existence. The ancient world was, as we saw, pre-scientific. The astronomy and mathematics of the Greek were a foreign importation, never thoroughly acclimatized in Greek culture. The Greeks systematized, generalized, and theorized, but the patient ways of investigation, the accumulation of positive knowledge, the minute methods of science, detailed and prolonged observation, experimental inquiry, were altogether alien to the Greek temperament. Only in Hellenistic Alexandria was any approach to scientific work conducted in the ancient classical world. What we call science arose in Europe as a result of a new spirit of inquiry, of new methods of investigation, of the method of experiment, observation, measurement, of the development of mathematics in a form unknown to the Greeks. That spirit and those methods were introduced to the European world by the Arabs. The first important point to note about the spirit of the Muslim culture, then, is that, for purposes of knowledge, it fixes its gaze on the concrete, the finite. It is further clear that the birth of the method of observation and experiment in Islam was due not to a compromise with Greek thought, but to a prolonged intellectual warfare with it. In fact, the influence of the Greeks who, Briffault says, were interested chiefly in theory, not in fact, tended rather to obscure the Muslims' vision of the Quran, and for at least 2 centuries kept the practical Arab temperament from asserting itself and coming to its own. I want, therefore, definitely to eradicate the misunderstanding that Greek thought in any way determined the character of the Muslim culture. Part of my argument you have seen, part you will see presently. Knowledge must begin with the concrete. It is the intellectual capture of and power over the concrete that makes it possible for the intellect of man to pass beyond the concrete. As the Quran says, "O company of jinn and men, if you can overpass the bounds of the heavens and the earth, then overpass them. but by power alone shall ye overpass them. But the universe, as a collection of finite things, presents itself as a kind of island situated in a pure vacuity to which time, regarded as a series of mutually exclusive moments, is nothing and does nothing. Such a vision of the universe leads the reflecting mind nowhere. The thought of a limit to perceptual space and time staggers the mind. The finite, as such, is an idol obstructing the movement of the mind, or, in order to overpass its bounds, the mind must overcome serial time and the pure vacuity of perceptual space. And verily, towards thy God is the limit, says the Quran. This verse embodies one of the deepest thoughts in the Quran, for it definitely suggests that the ultimate limit is to be sought not in the direction of the stars, but in an infinite cosmic life and spirituality. Now, the intellectual journey towards this ultimate limit is long and arduous. But in this effort too, the thought of Islam appears to have moved in a direction entirely different to that of the Greeks. The ideal of the Greeks, as Spengler tells us, was proportion, not infinity. The physical presentness of the finite, with its well-defined limits alone absorbed in the minds of the Greeks. In the history of the Muslim culture, on the other hand, we find that both in the realms of pure intellect and religious psychology, by which term I mean higher Sufism, the ideal revealed is the possession and enjoyment of the infinite. In a culture with such an attitude, the problem of space and time becomes a question of life and death. In one of these lectures, I have already given you some idea of the way in which the problem of time and space presented itself to Muslim thinkers, especially the Asharite. One reason why the atomism of Democritus never became popular in the world of Islam is that it involves the assumption of an absolute space. The Asharites were therefore driven to develop a different kind of atomism and tried to overcome the difficulties of perceptual space in a manner similar to modern atomism. On the side of mathematics, it must be remembered that since the days of Ptolemy, 87 to 165 AD, till the time of Sir Tusi, 120 to 174 AD, nobody gave serious thought to the difficulties of demonstrating the certitude of Euclid's parallel postulate on the basis of perceptual space. It was Tusi who first distributed the calm which prevailed in the world of mathematics for 1,000 years, and in his effort to improve the postulate realized the necessity of abandoning perceptual space. He thus furnished a basis, however slight, for the hyperspace movement of our time. It was, however, Biruni who, in his approach to the modern mathematical idea of function, saw, from a purely scientific point of view, the insufficiency of a static view of the universe. This again is a clear departure from the Greek view. The function idea introduces the element of time in our world picture. It turns the fixed into the variable and sees the universe not as a being but as a becoming. Spengler thinks that the mathematical idea of function is the symbol of the West, of which no other culture gives even a hint. In view of Al-Biruni, generalizing Newton's formula of interpolation from mathematical function to any function whatever. Spengler's claim has no foundation in fact. The transformation of the Greek concept of number from pure magnitude to pure relation really began with Khwarazmi's movement from arithmetic to algebra. Al-Biruni took a definite step towards what Spengler describes as chronological number, which signifies the mind's passage from being to becoming. Indeed, more recent developments in European mathematical societies tend rather to deprive time of its living historical character and to reduce it to a mere representation of space. That is why Whitehead's view of relativity is likely to appeal to Muslim students more than that of Einstein, in whose theory time loses its character of passage and mysteriously translates itself into utter space. Side by side with the progress of mathematical thought in Islam, we find the idea of evolution gradually shaping itself. It was Jahiz who first noted the changes in bird life caused by migrations. Later, Ibn Maskawai, who was a contemporary of Al-Biruni, gave it the shape of a more definite theory and adopted it in his theological work, Al-Fawz Askar. I reproduce here the substance of his evolutionary hypothesis, not because of its scientific value, but because of the light which it throws on the direction in which the Muslim thought was moving. According to Ibn Maskawai, plant life at the lowest stage of evolution does not need any seed for its birth and growth, nor does it perpetuate its species by means of a seed. This kind of plant life differs from minerals only in some little power of movement which grows in higher forms and reveals itself further in that the plant spreads out its branches and perpetuates its species by means of the seed. The power of movement gradually grows farther until we reach trees which possess a trunk, leaves, and fruits. At a higher stage of evolution, stand forms of plant life which need better soil and climate for their growth. The last stage of development is reached in vine and date palm, which stand, as it were, on the threshold of animal life. In the date palm, a clear sex distinction appears. Besides roots and fibers, it develops something which functions like the animal brain, on the integrity of which depends the life of the date palm. This is the highest stage in the development of plant life and a prelude to animal life. The first step forward towards animal life is freedom from earth rootedness, which is the germ of conscious movement. This is the initial stage of animality in which the sense of touch is the first and the sense of sight is the last to appear. With the development of the senses of animal acquires freedoms of movement, as in the case of worms, reptiles, ants and bees. Animality reaches its perfection in the horse, among quadrupeds, and the falcon among birds, and finally arrives at the frontier of humanity in the ape, which is just a degree below the man in the scale of evolution. Further evolution brings psychological changes with the growing power of discrimination and spirituality until humanity passes from barbarism to civilization. But it is really religious psychology, as in Khwaja Muhammad Parsi, which brings us much nearer to our modern ways of looking at the problem of space and time. View of time, stratifications, I have given you before. I will now give you the substance of his view of space. According to him, existence of some kind of space in relation to God is clear from the following verses of the Quran. Dost thou not see that God knoweth all that is in the heavens and all that is in the earth? 3 persons speak not privately together, but he is their fourth, nor 5, but he is their sixth, nor fewer, nor more, but wherever they be, he is with them. 58:7. Ye shall not be employed in affairs, nor shall ye read a text out of the Quran, nor shall ye do any work, but we will be witness over you when you are engaged therein. And the weight of an atom on earth or in the heaven escapeth not thy Lord, nor is there aught that is less than this or greater, but it is in the perspicuous book 1061. We created man, and we know what his soul whispereth to him, and we are closer to him than his neck vein. 50:16.